Thank you for joining us. 2 years after the Holocaust, in 1947, the United Nations voted to create a homeland for the Jewish people on the very same land where they lived over 3,000 years ago. Our guest today is Nitzan Siegel, an outstanding and distinguished young officer in the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, who lived all her life on a kibbutz next to the Gaza Strip. She very personally understands the reality of the orchestrated conflicts against Israel and will share some of her thoughts on this, followed by a perspective from Marc Goldman and these messages. Joining us now from Israel is Nitzan Siegel. Nitzan, it's great to finally have you on the Shalom Show from the other side of the world in Israel.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, of course, it's our honor and pleasure, really. But you know what? We live in a world of so much misinformation, so much incredibly misguided information that people are subjected to. It is horrifying to me personally, actually. You see, you're actually living there, right there in Israel. You've experienced it all your life. I understand you grew up in kibbutz Dvir, adjacent to the Gaza Strip. Is that correct?
Yeah. I grew up about 25 kilometers from the Gaza Strip. I grew up before it was divided from Israel and when it was a part of Israel, and then when it was disconnected. And at the times with the bombings and the wars and everything, it was close to me since I was a little kid.
Wow. So I can only imagine the amount of trauma and anxiety and stress you and all your family and friends close by experience time and time again. You see, here in America, people don't understand. They're so busy enjoying the comforts of life and chasing out their careers. And in a world of diminishing social and family values, people just don't understand what it's like to live as you have all your life.
Well, if I compare myself to people who live in the Gaza Strip, inside it, my life is amazing. I have a regular reality. I work, I study, I do everything. We're used to it. We're trained. We know how to behave. It's part of our everyday. So for us, what you call anxiety or trauma, for me, it's just my reality. It's just how I grew up. I don't feel like my childhood was different in any way.
Maybe because you never experienced as peaceful and pampered a lifestyle as kids in the United States and Canada and so forth. But you know what? Yeah. What concerns me really is the misinformation and how really all my life I realized, ever since I emigrated from England to Israel as a youth, my experience is Israel just wants to live in peace, has so much to contribute to the neighbors. Sure, there's peace with Egypt and Jordan, and President Trump made this amazing, these peace accords with more Arab countries. But generally, it is just inconceivable to me that so many people just don't understand the reality, the truth. And just recently, a popular politician had the extreme ignorance and chutzpah to describe the last reaction of Israel to unprecedented provocation and hostilities from Gaza. She regarded Israel as the instigator. So it's just incredible how blind some people can be, and then others will blindly listen. So I think ignorance in this world is dangerous.
I agree. I think misinformation, when very influential people say things with their confidence and their intelligence, you believe them. If I hadn't lived here and saw what I saw and grew up with what I grew up and experienced what I have experienced, then I would believe them too. because when you don't know what actually happens, then you don't know what to believe. And I can tell you from actually growing up very close to the Gaza Strip and having experienced bombing and wars in my home as a civilian, I didn't even know anything until I actually went to the army and saw it with my own eyes. So it's very hard for me to understand how people who haven't even been to Israel, not even to the Gaza Strip or to the West Bank or to the Lebanon Strip, how can they know what goes on here? How can they know what each side is feeling and experiencing? They haven't even been here.
But yet they judge Israel and hold Israel to perhaps a higher standard, a compliment I think Israel could do without, but it isn't a compliment actually. They just dwell on Israel and victimize Israel in the UN and elsewhere while ignoring worse atrocities that occur perpetrated by other countries against each other. And of course, Israel has not committed any atrocities. Israel is just trying to defend itself and survive.
It's also important to say that Israel is defending every person who lives in Israel. It doesn't matter if they're Muslim or Christian or Jewish. Israel, the IDF, works as a defense force of Israel's citizens. We don't see any difference between someone who isn't Jewish or is Jewish. So when I was in the West Bank, we had to protect people that were there. And if it was a Jewish person or an Arab person or even Palestinians, we had to protect them. And that's the impossible situation that the IDF is in. And it's being judged for something that people don't fully comprehend. Because the situation is you have two very extreme sides to the story. The people in the Jewish side who believe that that land is ours, and we can't judge someone's beliefs. All their beliefs are related to that they have the right to live there. And on the other side, we have the Palestinian side who believe the same thing, but they also take it to extreme violence. They also interpret everything in the Quran to violence and destroying the Jewish side. So when you think about it, it's an endless loop of an impossible situation. And I think being there and experiencing it and seeing how you can't even talk to each side because each side can't even understand, how can you solve this? How can you even say, let's solve it? There is no solution and each side doesn't even want it, doesn't want to listen to the solution. You offer solutions, you offer peace offers, and they say no because they don't want to hear them. They just want what they decided they want. And they listen to extremists that tell them, this is the way you can get it. The only way you can get it is by 1, 2, 3, by killing a Jewish person, by doing a terrorist attack, by taking the land. You can't do it in a different way. You can't coexist. You have to take it. And as a soldier, you see it and you say, okay, so how do I solve this? And you can't. You just have to protect that they won't kill each other.
What a fascinating and unfortunate truth. Israel was voted into existence, back into existence in 1947 as a homeland for the Jewish people. And you, a young officer, captain in the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, you've seen it all, really. And here there's some expressions like, if the Arabs would put down their weapons, all their offensive weapons, there'd be no more war. But if Israel put down its weapons, there'd be no more Israel.
Yes. Unfortunately, of course, I'm not including all of the Arabs, all of the Palestinians, because honestly, you can't do that. You can't generalize it. There are extremists that are louder and more violent and more dangerous. And they are the people that if we don't protect ourselves, they will destroy us. and they do it on a daily basis. People don't see it because they don't experience it. I haven't lived in the West Bank, so I had no idea how it happened every day. And then when I went to the army and I served in the West Bank, I saw that every day there were attempts for terrorist attacks. Every single day, people throw rocks, they throw burning bottles, and that's just like the smallest thing that could happen on a regular day. We're not even talking about bombing or shooting at people.
Absolutely terrible. I was just thinking about Germany. You know, Germany is a country of great culture, classical music, art, poetry. Yet Germany was a country in which this vile situation of Adolf Hitler and his Nazis were tolerated and allowed to come into power. So silence before injustice is in itself a crime. And of course, as you say, not all Palestinians or Muslims in this world are bad people at all, or criminals. Many of them want peace and love their families and so forth. It is though a minority of extremists who seem to overpower and control.
You can't get peace when whoever controls the Palestinians, and the majority of them, is a terrorist organization. You can't make peace with a terrorist organization. They don't want peace.
Well, yeah, in fact, the United States has designated Hamas as a terrorist organization. But it's interesting how politics change, and views and the opinions of different appointed people seem to stream in all sorts of different directions, while the realities on the ground in Israel remain the same. And Israel is the only country, the only shining star of democracy in the Middle East, actually. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, when you say it, it's very sad to think about it, but on the daily basis, when I was in the West Bank, for instance, there were so many places that you could see Palestinians and Jewish Israelis coexist so peacefully and so nicely. They would go to bathe in the lakes together. They would go shop in the same supermarkets. They would go to the same places, and it would be okay. And then there would be one extremist from Hamas or the jihad or someone that would just ruin everything with one terrorist attack, would make everything worse. And the whole day would be ruined. There could be a great day of coexisting for the majority of the people, and then one extremist ruins it all. And the same happened this time, I can tell you, in the South, where I live, we coexist with Muslim Bedouins, who are Arabs that live in Israel forever. And they are a part of our lives. They work with us, they study with us, they are friends. I go into their villages and cities all the time, and I don't feel threatened. I don't feel like I'm a stranger. But then when the bombing happened the last time, and the entire world started to say their opinion, it started to heat up, and we found ourselves fighting. They went to the streets, and there were riots in the streets with people that I'm used to live with and coexist and be their friend. And now they're protesting about something violently. It was very confusing, and it kind of felt like when the entire world is getting into something that's none of their business, it actually made things worse.
Absolutely. You know, and the interesting thing is some research has been done, and they say that most Arabs living in Israel prefer to live in Israel. They have better lives than they would have in Lebanon and other countries.
Well, yeah, I mean, every person that lived in a Muslim country and moved to Israel has a better life. Jewish and Muslim, Jewish and Arabs. I mean, my grandfather and grandmother are from Morocco and Tunisia. These are Muslim countries, and they moved to Israel because their life there wasn't good. Under Muslim protection, they weren't good. Not for them as Jews and not for Muslims. And when they come here, you have this huge place, a tiny place with so many cultures and so many people that coexist, and they're happier. But when the entire world says you shouldn't be happy, you should have this country, you should have the entire territory, then it heats things up that shouldn't be heated. As I said, I coexisted with Muslims my entire life. I have learned a lot about the Quran and the Muslim culture, and most of it is based on such beautiful elements of respect and honor. And it is so sad to see how extremists interpret this beautiful Quran, this beautiful religion, into violence, into hatred, into genocide. And that's what makes the difference, because the people who actually see it as it is, they coexist perfectly and they're happy. And the extremists that take it to very violent sides, and I don't even know how they get to that from this amazing book and rules and religion, they turn it into hate. And it's very sad, and it's even scary.
Absolutely. But it is said that it is countries like Iran that are promoting this conflict and arranging for more and more terrorist activities and funding weapons. In fact, speaking of weapons, why would any individual or entity or police force or self-defense organization need offensive weapons? I mean, rockets and missiles and Scuds are not defensive weapons. They are only designed for destruction and indiscriminate killing. So actually, if we just look at the weapons that Hamas and other terrorist organizations want to amass and continue to amass, these are not defensive weapons, they are offensive weapons. So what are your thoughts with regard to the clear proof by just looking at the actual weapons themselves?
The weapons themselves are there to attack, are there to make noise, or they're just state a point. But the point is to serve Hamas, to serve an organization that doesn't even want peace, that just wants the territory. We used to see it in the Gaza Strip when there were protests every week. And they would come in buses. They would come so many people, from teenagers to little kids to just regular people. And they would have to come because Hamas rules there and they say, you need to come. A little kid who's 10 years old maybe comes there and throws rocks and burning bottles because that's what they raised him to do. He doesn't know what he's even doing. And it's sad. It's sad that this organization has these things and these abilities to hurt people when all they're hurting is their civilians. They shoot those rockets from homes that have children in them. We at the IDF, we warn them before we bomb. We say, get out of the houses. We have Hamas people in there shooting at us. We want to ruin that. Please get out of the house if you're a civilian. We warn them and they don't let them go.
No army, sorry for interrupting you again, no army in the world warns its enemies. And brainwashing little children is child abuse. If kids in this country were exposed to a little bit of what these children are over there in Gaza and other parts of the Middle East, they'd be arrested. It's ridiculous. One more question. Speaking of materials and concrete and building supplies, if their intentions were good, why on earth do they use a significant percentage of these materials to secretly dig tunnels under the border in order to sneak into Israel? What is What useful purpose could there possibly be for numerous tunnels to be dug into Israel from Lebanon and, in this case, of course, Gaza?
Only war, Richard. Only war.
How sad, how very sad that is. So Nitzan, you've experienced so much in your life, and you deserve happiness and stability. Again, the Muslim world is so large, bigger than the United States. I don't see why some elements there really want Israel so much, tiny little Israel, which was voted into existence by the UN in 1947 as a Jewish homeland. They should just coexist and, with joint cooperation, make the deserts bloom. How do you see the future?
I very much hope in the future that no terrorist organization will rule the Palestinian side. I very much hope that they will have their independence or coexistence with us, whichever one they will accept. I believe that Israel will accept it too. And it's very hard to see the future right now. I'll be honest.
Always has been. Nitzan, you are really a hero. And unlike so many spoiled, superficial people running around here in Florida and the United States in general, you are the real deal and worthy of great respect and admiration. And I would like to end by saying, I would very much like to invite you to be back on the show in the future, whenever convenient.
Thank you. It's very nice being here.
Thank you for joining us. And on that note, we'll say goodbye for now. Shalom.
Goodbye.
Joining us now again is Marc Goldman. Marc, always good to have you on the show.
Always a pleasure to be on such a wonderful show, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Kind words. We just had this outstanding Israeli young officer sharing her thoughts and views. And unlike so many superficial people in the world who don't understand what's really going on, all her life she's lived in a kibbutz adjacent to the Gaza Strip, and she knows from her early childhood until the present time exactly what the reality is. The theme, as you heard from her, basically is people in the world are just misinformed, misguided, anti-Semitic. They don't know the real truth, the real facts. You are one of the few American Jews who's actually visited Israel, and if everybody did, Jews and Gentiles alike, they'd really understand what the reality is. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think in that regard, if I had to describe it, the best I might do is to say, imagine if, which I happen to be from, but imagine if you live in New Jersey and that you're surrounded by New York and Connecticut and Pennsylvania, and all of them want to destroy you. And they try everything that they can to do that, and they blow up people and do all kinds of behaviors that are inconceivable to us. So that is one reality that we can't even comprehend, to be living, like I said, if the people in New Jersey were living with states around them that were saying that and taking actions in order to accomplish that, that would be at least bring people to at least reality. I think another point that people would be worthwhile for people to be aware of is this. We hear constantly Israel being accused of being the apartheid state, and about the treatment of the Muslims who live in Israel and the Arabs who live in Israel. And the reality is, when you read the Torah and when you read what Judaism says, it talks about treating everyone the same, and everyone is equal, and there's no racism, there's no anything to be negative. Whereas if you look at Islam, Islam says everyone who's not a Muslim is beneath me, as a second-class citizen, must pay taxes, must listen to what I say. And if I tell them to convert and they don't, then I can kill them. So that is the real apartheid religion, Islam. And it says it right in their books, and the behavior shows it. Most people essentially accuse you of what it is that they're doing.
That is certainly true about most people in this world, but back to our original point, what are your thoughts about the fact that most people just do not understand really what's going in Israel, and perhaps they should see for themselves and not blindly accept the views of certain haters?
I couldn't agree more. So when they hear something on the news, they may accept it as true, even though it is completely fake. And we know from reality and experience, but how many people are going to look it up? We need to educate people so that they recognize the truth of it and why Israel has so much hostility all around it from people who want to dominate. It's hard for any of us to understand what we just heard from Nitzan, who has to live with it every day, to appreciate the fact that there is such hostility so close to you. So when the media picks up and repeats and ignore the truth, then it becomes far more challenging without question.
Absolutely understood. And I think all we can do is hope that there'll be better education and information, and hopefully one day media will begin reporting reality and truth in a balanced, objective, and honest way, as it should have all along.
Amen to that. And that's one of the reasons I'm so pleased to be on your show, because you're here to have the truth come out. And I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you, Marc.
Thank you, Richard.
Life Extension magazine brings you new discoveries in health and anti-aging. Our science-based research and supplements are so advanced they're many years ahead of the medical mainstream, with quality control standards that exceed FDA mandates. Life Extension has covered groundbreaking medical research for more than 35 years. For your health and future, you deserve the best. Learn more at lifeextension.com.
This concludes our special update for today. I'm Richard Peritz. Thank you for being with us.